The introduction to Surah 3. Al-Imran, the family of Amran, revealed at Medina, 20 sections, 199 verses. The name of this chapter is taken from the mention of Imran in verse 32. Imran is the same as Amran, the father of Moses and Aaron. It is an appropriate title as the chapter deals with the departure of prophethood from the Mosaic dispensation. The chapter opens with a statement relating to the divine origin of the Holy Qur'an as well as the Torah and the Gospel. It then gives a rule of interpretation, neglect of which has led to numerous errors in religious beliefs. This rule of interpretation, which must be borne in mind in interpreting all divine books, is that every allegorical statement must be interpreted in such a manner as it may not contradict any of the clear principles laid down by divine revelation, as the Christian religion is based really on the wrong interpretation of certain allegorical statements, as Paul instigates by calling everything a shadow, and he's going to be the one that interprets things right. But, the Bible's living literature, I've explicitly shared that stuff. The rule is appropriately laid down as a preliminary to a discussion of the Christian religion. The preliminary remarks of the first section are followed in the second by an assertion of the unity of Allah, singular and definitive for God, of course, which is laid down as the clear basis of all religions, and its ultimate triumph is predicated. The third section refers to the departure from the house of Israel, of the spiritual kingdom, which was now being granted to another people, and the last chosen members of the Israelite race, or tribe, really, or group of tribes, are mentioned in the fourth. Among these is Jesus. Various misconceptions regarding whom necessitate rather a lengthy discussion in the two sections that follow. The seventh section contains the controversy with the Jews and the Christians, while the eighth deals with their machinations to discredit Islam. The ninth speaks of the testimony of the previous books and the prophets to the truth of Islam, while the 10th mentions the overwhelming testimony afforded by the Kaaba, the new spiritual center of the world. This is now followed by an exhortation in the following section to the Muslimin to remain united if they would achieve triumph. In view of the coming conflicts, they are told in the next to have guarded relations with the Jews, who, while outwardly friendly, were inwardly hostile to the Muslimin. The incidents of the Battle of Uhud, the causes of the misfortune experienced in it, and how triumph can be obtained are the points discussed from section 13 to the 18th. The 19th speaks of the carpings of the people of the book, while the 20th deals with the ultimate triumph of the faithful. The importance of the connection of this with the preceding chapter may be judged from the fact that taken together they are termed Zahrawan, meaning the two bright and shining ones. The two, in fact, may be treated as a single chapter, as each supplements and explains the other. The second chapter opens with a controversy with the Jews and deals at length with their connections, referring only briefly to the Christians. The third chapter opens with a controversy with the Christians and deals at length with their contentions, referring only briefly to the Jews. Again, the second chapter deals particularly with the necessity of fighting against an enemy who is bent on the extirpation of Islam, while the third deals with events of one of the battles which the enemy waged with the view to wipe out Islam by destroying its stronghold in Medina. The whole of the chapter was revealed at Medina, and is generally supposed to be the second or the third in order in the Medina revelation. The latter portion from section 13 almost to the end distinctively relates the incidents of the Battle of Uhud, and therefore the third year of Al-Hijra may be fixed as the date of its revelation. The first portion, especially the dealing with the birth and ministry of Jesus, is said by some to have been revealed on the occasion of the visit of a disputation of the Najran Christians, which took place in the 10th year Al-Hijra, but there's no evidence for it. The whole chapter belonging to the third year of the Hijra, with the possible exception to verse 60, which speaks of Mubahala, the curse contest, you could say. You should look into it more. And may have been revealed on the occasion of the visit of the Najran disputation. And by looking into it more, it's evoking the curse of God upon the liars regarding, whether monotheism or polytheism is the right way, right? Well, there's more to it. That's what I meant. Chapter 4, Al-Nisa, the women, revealed at Medina. 24 sections, 177 verses. This chapter is named the women because it deals chiefly with the rights of women. The connection of the last chapter with this one lies in the fact that the chapter deals with the Battle of Uhud, while this one deals with the circumstances to which the battle had given rise, for the decimation of the Muslim force had left a large number of orphans and widows to be looked after, and as with duties toward these two classes that the chapter opens, the two chief features of the Battle of Uhud were the death of a large number of Muslimin and the desertion of the hypocrites, while following it were circumstances which brought about the final repute with the Jews. As it is with these three subjects that the chapter deals, the opening section lays down injunctions relating to the duties of guardians toward their orphan wives. The second section brings women to a status, I think I ended up squeaking the table, of equality with men, and lays down a new law of inheritance. For among the Arabs, a woman had no right to inherit the property of a deceased relative, and under American law, unless she can have a claim to it in the court, but she doesn't have any inherent rights in America either. The fourth section discusses which women may not be taken in marriage, and the fifth gives them the right of disposing of their earnings as they please, while the sixth verse points out the remedy for when there is a disagreement between the husband and the wife, and then inculcates the principle of charity in general, introducing the subject of hypocrisy towards its close. After having laid stress in the 7th and the 8th sections upon external as well as internal purity, showing how the Jews had neglected the latter of these, and how, for no other reason than envy of the Muslimin, had they sided with the polytheists, and after having enjoined the Muslimin to be strictly firm in justice, we are led on in the 9th section to the dealings of the hypocrites, who had refused to accept the Prophet's judgment in going out to meet the enemy. We are then told in the 9th section that the question of war was a question of life and death for the Muslimin. It wasn't some war of conquest, as you could say. I mean, obviously you conquest when you win, but, Islam was never a religion that supported wars of conquest. As the 11th section deals with the attitude of the hypocrites. The 12th shows how the waverers were dealt with. The 13th states when and to what extent the murder of a Muslim is excusable, because it was very often by treachery or hypocrisy that the Muslimin were killed. The 14th shows that the Muslim were compelled to remain with the enemy against their own wishes were excusable. The 15th warns the Muslimin against being surprised in battles when saying their prayers. The 16th and the 17th refers to the secret councils of hypocrites. The 18th condemns idolatry because it is the idolatrous hypocrites that are spoken of throughout the previous sections, and the subject is thus brought to a close. Previous to the introduction of the third chief subject of this chapter, there is a revelation in the 19th section to equitable dealings with orphans and women, and the subject is generalized in the 20th, while in the same section the hypocrites from among the Jews are dealt with. The next predicts their end, at the same time showing that the belief in previous prophets could do them no good if they rejected the holy prophet. Well, that's overstating it, but the good is minimized if you piecemeal what the revelation is, which is kind of sort of the definition of liberal, is that your own are to please society or something. You're stepping aside from religious and family values. You're being liberal. You're you're leaving the conditions off to the side or something. The 22nd speaks of the transgressions and of their false allegations regarding the death of Jesus on the cross. Islam denies that there was a death on the cross, and the evidence seems to show that it was there to make Jesus out to be a god, although dying on a cross is a poor argument for that one. But only in the accounts in the Gospels that don't really make Jesus out to be a god make him out to be like Matthew 7:21 or some other such passage. They leave off the crucifixion thing, or they have somebody else die. I mean that's what they relate. The 23rd section tells them that the whole of the previous prophecy pointed to the appearance of the holy prophet Muhammad, while the last one, after referring briefly to the Christians' error in deifying Jesus, closes with a reversion to the subject of inheritance. As this chapter treats of many of the questions arising from the Battle of Uhud, there seems to be little doubt that it was revealed immediately after the battle, and thus, in arrangement, so in the order of revelations, it follows the last chapter. The main portion of it thus belongs to the 4th year of the Hijrah, while there is no reason to deny that some portions may have been revealed during the close of the 3rd or the beginning of the 5th year. Meldek's suggestion, however, that verse 115 to 125 and 130 to 132 belong to the Meccan revelation, based as it is on the mere fact that the Jews are there referred to in a friendly spirit, is quite wrong, because as shown in 478, there's no verse 478 of any chapter, and elsewhere that the prophet was fair to the Jews even when they were most inimical to him, and the verses referred to, therefore, belong to the 4th or 5th year of the Hijrah. And that's one of the things we have, too, is there's a lot of this talking like, this abrogation doctrine, right? So the idea that part of the Quran you don't have to follow anymore because a later part of the Quran was learned or something like that. Oh, it's interesting. Note 666 regards the food. But it turns out a lot of the passages that they say, oh, well, no tolerance was no longer accepted because that was an earlier verse. It turns out that's one of the later verses, and one of the other things that people say that with. But chapter 5, Al-Ma'adah, the food, revealed at Medina, 16 sections, 120 verses. The name of this chapter is taken from the mention of a demand for food, the daily bread on the part of the followers of Jesus Christ, to which the reference is made towards the end of the chapter. The chapter deals with the Christians in particular, and the adoption of this name might be with a view to express the Christian love of the dainties of this life. The chapter stands in almost the same relation to the last as the third to the second. Thus, while the 4th chapter deals chiefly with hypocrites, the 5th deals with those who had assumed open enmity to Islam, being interspersed here and there with directions for al-Muslimin. Again, while the 4th chapter deals with the question of Jewish disobedience, this gives prominence to the Christian transgressions due to their inordinate worldly love, their distinction being made plain in the concluding portions of the 2 chapters. The chapter opens with an exhortation to the Muslimin to remain true to their obligations. An injunction is followed by certain deals relating to the performance of the pilgrimage, to foods, and to social relations with other people, and by the announcement of that religion was made perfect in Islam. The 2nd section, which calls attention to the duty of uprightness, is, as it were, a caution against laying too much stress upon details of the law to the utter neglect of the inner qualities which make the real man. The 3rd section speaks of the covenants made with the Jews and the Christians, and of the violation of their covenant by the Christians in assigning a divine dignity to a mere mortal. The 4th section takes up the Jewish violation of the covenant at the very outset of their national life and points out the evil consequences of their disobedience. Now, see the disputes between the husband and the wife, the passage that people are talking about. It first should be noted that the woman was at fault. And you have a word that isn't quite translated that way in other passages, and there's further context that would be misunderstood. The 5th section, opening with the lesson to the Jews in Cain's aggression, plainly points toward the end of the punishment of the Jews who are now engaged in making war upon the prophet, and the subject of the punishment of similar offenses is continued in the 6th section. The 7th speaks of the relation of the Quranic revelation to previous revelations and points out that this final revelation is really the fulfillment and perfection of all those revelations. The 8th section warns al-Muslimin of the hostile attitude of the Jews and the Christians, and those who apostatize, the subject being continued in the 9th. Apostasy is more clearly dealt with in Surah 4, but, it's like to be continued in the 9th, which speaks of the mockery of the new Islamic religion, as as they saw Muslim as the new religion, rather than just the Arabic word for it, with a reviving revelation. The 10th introduces the subject of Christian deviation from the truth, while the 11th shows that Al-Qur'an is not unjust to them on account of their enmity towards Islam, valuing their meekness of monks and priests among them, and recognizing their nearness to Islam in contrast with the Jews and the polytheists. The 3 sections that follow are especially addressed to the believers, while hinting at Christian disregard of the middle course and of their aggression against al-Muslimin. The 12th section, while warning the Muslimin on one hand of such practices as monkery, which required a man to deprive himself even of lawful things, cautions them on the other against the use of impure drugs, such as intoxicating liquors, and the acquisition of property by illegal means, such as gambling, the 2 besetting sins of the Christian nations, and requires obedience and regard of duty to be made the main principle of action. The 13th section lays stress on the security of the Kaaba, containing a prophetic allusion to the design of a powerful Christian nations. The 14th section, containing further directions for the Muslimin, lays special stress on the gravity of the sin of polytheism, which had led the Christians furthest away from the truth, notwithstanding their proximity to Islam. The 2 concluding sections of the chapter deal with the Christian religion more plainly. Attention is drawn in the 15th to the Christian love of this life and their being subjected to an unprecedented punishment as a result of their materialistic tendencies. The 16th, which is the last section, contains a plain condemnation of the doctrine of the divinity of Jesus and out of the mouth of that prophet himself. makes it clear that this doctrine found its way to the Christian religion after his death and gives hope of their finally finding protection in Islam. A confederation of the topics dealt with in this chapter and the opinions of different authorities led us almost certain conclusion that this chapter follows in the order of revelation as it does with arrangement. The last chapter and main portion of it were revealed within 5 and 7 Hijra. The tendency of some Christian critics to ascribe verses condemning certain Jewish or Christian doctrines to a period when political relations with these people became strained is to be depreciated, for, as a matter of fact, the Qur'an did not deny the good in these religions at any time, nor did it ever approve of their errors. For instance, it is in an early Meccan revelation that we find the Christian doctrine of the sonship of Jesus condemned in the severest terms, 1988-92, while it is here in a late Medina revelation that we find the Christians praised on account of their meekness. There is, however, one verse in this chapter which belongs to a much later period than the main portion of the chapter. The date of the revelation of which can be fixed with certainty. It is the 3rd verse, and it speaks of the perfection of the religion in Islam, of its revelation in the Holy Prophet's last pilgrimage to Mecca in the year 10 al-Hijra. There is not the least doubt. And further, there is the clearest testimony that it was revealed on the 9th Dhul-Hijjah in that year. The 9th of, when the Holy Prophet was on the plain of Arafat. Bukhari, chapter 2, number 32. And there's, we can talk about the mystic feast and all that stuff. We can talk about how that relates in verse 103, which here the Bahira is said to be, he cut or slit, meaning a she-camel having her ear slit. When a she-camel, according to some, also a she-goat had brought 4 or 5 or 7 or 10 young ones. The last of these, if a male, was slaughtered, but if a female, her ear was slit. According to others, it was the mother, she also being exempted from slaughter and carrying burdens. Sa'eba, from Saba, which means it ran of itself, signifies any beast left to pasture without attention. According to some, it was the mother of a Bahira, or a she-camel, with which, having brought forth females at 10 successive births, was set at liberty to pasture where she would, and was not ridden, nor was her milk taken. Wasila, from Wasala, meaning he connected or joined, means a she-goat, which has brought forth twins, a male and a female. When the male was brought forth alone, it was slaughtered to the idols, the female alone being wept. But in the case of the male and the female being born twins, the male was considered to be joined to the female, and was therefore not sacrificed to what they considered to be gods. Hami, Hami, okay, yeah. From Hamahu, are he prohibited or interdicted it, are protected or guarded it, means a stallion camel that has been prohibited or interdicted its back, to be used for bearing a rider or any burden, that is left at liberty and not made any use of, whose offspring in the 2nd degree of descent has been fertile. And so, the issues with the table. Well, there's different, there can't be 2 visions that involve a table. Chapter 6, Al-An'am, the cattle, revealed at Mecca, 20 sections, 166 verses. The name of this chapter is taken from the mention of the cattle in connection with certain superstitions and idolatrous practices of the Arabs, the abolition of which was needed to establish the doctrine of divine unity in all its purity. The object of Islam was not simply to preach unity, but to make it the basis of a Muslim's practical life, and so to uproot all idolatrous practices. The last chapter deals, towards its close, with the Christian doctrine of the deification of Jesus, and hence this chapter is intended to deal at length with the doctrine of divine unity, and its ultimate triumph, not only over idolatry, but over all kinds of polytheism. The prophet had preached this noble doctrine for 12 whole years without apparently causing any great change in the national idol worship of the people. To an outward observer, therefore, the cause of the prophet seemed an utter failure, yet so marvelous was his faith in the ultimate triumph of divine unity that no obstacle, no apparent failure had shaken it up, the least, and the words with which this chapter opens are uttered with unshakable confidence in the ultimate triumph of his cause, as if he had never received the least check with his onward course, and as though the goal was not only within sight, but close at hand, opening with a forcible declaration of the ultimate triumph of divine unity, and referring to the greatness of his mercy in the second section. The doctrine of unity always being combined with the doctrine of unique mercy of the divine being, it refers in the third to polytheists' own evidence against their polytheism. The rejection of this great truth and its consequences are then stated in the fourth or sixth sections, mentioning incidentally the reward of believers in the sixth section. In the two succeeding sections, the divine judgment is declared to be imminent, the ninth, while calling attention to the necessity of submission to the divine being. The path of Abraham's religion mentions the arguments by which Abraham, the great patriarch, may be said to be the father of monotheism, convinced his countrymen of the futility of the worship of any other object than Allah. The 10th section mentions the names of 17 other prophets who preached the unity of the divine being, and the holy prophet is enjoined to follow in their footsteps. The 11th section draws attention to the truth of the divine revelation of Al-Qur'an, which was now the bearer of that notable message of divine unity to mankind, and the next speaks of the ultimate triumph of that message. The 13th section states that this triumph would be brought about by a gradual progress, and the 14th refers to the polytheists' opposition. The plans adopted by the chief opponents are then hinted at in the 15th, and their failure prophesied in the 16th section, which deals with some of the evils of idolatry. The next two refer to the polytheist self-imposed superstitious restrictions against the use of the flesh of certain animals and the prohibited foods. The guiding rules of life are briefly stated in the 19th section, while the chapter is closed by drawing attention to the great goal before the faithful, because undoubtedly the doctrine of unity raised the ideal of human life to a very high standard. The whole of this chapter was revealed in one portion. It is generally considered to belong to the last year of the Holy Prophet's life at Mecca. Chapter 7, Al-Araf, the Elevated Places, revealed at Mecca, 24 sections, 206 verses. The title of this chapter is taken from the mention of Al-Araf are the elevated places on which stand those righteous servants of Allah who walk perfectly in the ways of truth and goodness. The prominent theme of this chapter is the truth of divine revelation, there being occasional references to the doctrine of divine unity, hence the references to the histories of previous prophets. The chapter opens with a statement of truth of the divine revelation as granted to the Holy Prophet, and the truth emphasized by a prophetic reference to the doom of those who oppose the propagation of the truth contained therein. The second section shows that the opposition to the prophet is similar to the devil's opposition to the righteous servants of God, whose prototype is Adam, and is followed by a third section by a warning to all men against the insinuations of the devil. The next 4 sections are devoted to general statements regarding the advent of prophets, the fate of those who reject and ill-treat them, and the ultimate triumph of the righteous. These are followed by 4 other sections containing illustrations of these general statements as drawn from the histories of 5 prophets whose names and the prominent incidents of whose lives were known to the Arabs, viz. Noah, Hud, Saleh, Lot, and Shuaib. All these prophets, though belonging to different nations and different countries, are mentioned in the chronological order of their appearance. These histories are followed in the 12th section by a warning to the opponents of the Holy Prophet, that if they did not mend their ways, they would meet with the same fate as overtook the former opponents of the truth. The remaining half of the chapter, with the exception of the last 3 sections, is taken up entirely with the history of Moses and the Israelites' importance, being attached to the history on account of the close resemblances of the prophet of Arabia to the great Israelite prophet, and on account of these clear prophecies of Moses regarding the appearance of a prophet from among the Ishmaelites, are the Arab nation. This is the reason that towards the end of the history mentioned is specially made of the prophecies contained in the Torah and the Gospel, and the last 3 sections are again of a general nature, referring first to the impress of divine unity among man's nature, thus adducing evidences of the truth of revelation, then to the coming of the doom, closing with a final word containing, as it were, the essence of the 2 chapters. The last chapter deals chiefly with the doctrine of divine unity, while this deals with the truth of revelation, and as the 2 subjects are closely interrelated, this chapter complements the last one, even as the closing section of that chapter deals with the revelation of Al-Qur'an. This one fittingly opens with an assertion relating to the divine source of the revelation contained in the Holy Qur'an. Internal as well as external evidence shows that this chapter was revealed at about the same time as the last chapter. Hence, the date of its revelation may be placed at the period just prior to the flight. The best opinion among the earliest commentators is that the whole of it was revealed at Mecca. Now let's remember of the success that people tend to ignore. There is the success that is attaining to good and truth, consciousness and actions. There is the success that is to step away from ignorance, to step away from evil in one way or another. And regardless of what's the world has for its standards, and I mean the world for itself, not that the world is inherently evil, it's just people don't use it. These are successes.